The new album's called Old Adam. That's one of the tracks on the album. It's sort of playing with the Bible and looking back to the time when Adam and Eve were around and a world without sin and corruption, and then badness starts to happen, but just idealising that world where nothing is wrong and sort of comparing that to the world today. And that kind of sowed the seed for the plan for the whole album. I wanted to look at songs as mirrors of society and of our morality, really, and why we use stories to help us understand where we are in the world and what we think about stuff. And I just find that interesting to look at what we think people are now, why we think that would be better, what that's all about, and doing that through the oldest story in the book, Adam and Eve. I just think it's kind of a starting place for the album. Doing gigs and working at repertoire, new songs creep up and creep in. So there's some songs on it that I've been doing live for ages, and people ask after gigs, oh, have you got The Briar and the Rose? Or at the Full English gigs, Willow Glen was a real classic, and that didn't make the Full English album. So I had some songs I knew people wanted to hear. So that was the starting point, or that was the starting point of repertoire. But of course you don't want just an album of random things stuck together. So as I decided, right, okay, this is going to be an album, I pulled all the bits I've got together, looked at it, tried to work out why I was interested in those songs, how they could tie together, and then pulled it all into one big shape. And so the overarching thing I brought was that these are all songs with messages, they're all traditions, they've all got something, and they've all appealed to me in some way. So why do I like these songs? What do they say to me? What's the meaning? And so trying to pull that together as a sort of an exploration of why we use songs, what is storytelling about, how does that make me me, how do they help me understand rights and wrongs, and how I want to live through the characters in these stories. So the band are a mixture. I've gone back to my Hurricane party, which I was doing before the Full English, and so that is Sam Sweeney, Rob Harbron. Andy Cutting, unfortunately, has been too busy, so he's not involved in this bit of the project. But Roger Wilson is back with us again, which is wonderful to work with Roger again. And then I've also brought Ben Nichols, who was the bass player in the Full English, along because he was so great to work with on that project. And brought in a percussionist, Toby Kearney, who's incredible, classically trained percussionist. So having the bass and drums has taken it to a whole different level. And of course, I've been working with John Bowden. Because we all live so far apart and I've not been gigging as this band for a while, getting together and rehearsing and working stuff up has been a different process to normal. Normally we get together quite a lot and rehearse and work things up, but this one I did quite a lot at home. Me and John arranged some things, and then others were done with the band in quite intensive little periods of pulling things together. And to be honest, quite a lot was done in the studio, which is really unusual for me. I know normally I've gigged things and I know exactly kind of what I want it to sound like before we hit the studio, but Andy Bell, the producer, pulled quite a lot of ideas out while we were there at Real World. Well, we recorded one extra track back in the studio in Sheffield because Martin Simpson, I'd been singing Willow Glen with him on the Full English tour, which had been going really well. And so I didn't want to just re-record that with a new band. I wanted Martin in on it, and he's great and he's been on other albums and I really like working with him. So Rob came up and we did a little trio thing on the Willow Glen, which is lovely.
Okay, whenever you like.
So we went and recorded it at Real World Studios down near Bath, Peter Gabriel's studio. Sam even had Peter Gabriel's microphone. He was very excited. We chose that studio because it's where we did the Full English, again with Andy Bell, producer. And so I knew the place, I knew we had to be in and out quite quickly. So Andy basically needed everything at his touch, you know, so that he could just get on with it and not struggling with space and moving things around. And it's quite exciting, it's a lovely place. Spent 3 days heads down, immersed in it, long days, and came out the other end with an album, which is great. And some of it got written there, some of the vibe came out, especially Ben on bass and Toby on drums. A lot of their feel and the sort of riffs that they wrote were done there in the recording. I think they work like that on other projects as well, which is new for me. I'm quite used to having everything arranged and set up beforehand, but they were very much into creating a vibe for the album. Green Gravel is, well, some people might remember it from little piano tutorial books. You know, they do like Merrily We Roll Along, and Green Gravel is one of those songs in there. And it's often called Irish, but I'm not sure it is, or it might be well known in Ireland as well. But there's a book called Traditional Games of England, Scotland and Ireland by Alice Bertha Gomm in 2 volumes. I love this book. And it's got loads of versions of it. So she goes around playgrounds and collected kids singing songs, and that's a kids' playground sort of jumping song. I wrote the tune for this one sat at a piano this time. Quite often I write tunes in my head, but I've been a bit more instrument based, and it's got a funny little 4th jump in it. The tune's really repetitive, partly because it's a kids' jumping game. I think the versions lend themselves to that sort of thing. So I didn't really want this big orchestral arrangement to go with it. I mean, you could probably do something like that with it, but I imagined something very vocal heavy. And initially I thought we'd just do it with vocals, maybe a bit of percussion. So yeah, when I first took it, we worked some vocal stuff out, but it was sounding a bit, it didn't work too well, and the mixtures between unison and harmony, it sounds odd or contradictory, but unison is a lot stronger than harmony, so when you spread it out into full harmony, you'd think that that would be the big impact, but it's not, it's bringing it back to unison, so it was feeling a bit choppy. And so then Ben and Toby just got on it, and Ben came up with this amazing riff, and it just fell into its own kind of groove, really. And I think it's got a really powerful step to it. It's edgy. Even though I've got this massive band, and it's brilliant being able to play with such phenomenal musicians, and building arrangements itself is a really interesting process, and I do like doing it, and I like making albums, but what I really love is telling stories and singing songs. So it's quite important for me that you could take all these arrangements off and you're left with music. I think a lot of songwriters, they write tracks and they write music as a whole piece, which is brilliant, and that is a way of making music, definitely. But for traditional music, I think the transferability of it is really quite important, and these aren't definitives. I'm taking stuff from elsewhere and I'm changing it, and I'd like to think that it can just go from what I've done. Anyone can take it and change it and make what they like out of that as well. And then in February to just take a proper show on the road. It'll be really interesting because that'll be the first time this lineup has stood on a stage and played together. We've done a lot of playing together and negotiating stuff together, but I've not stood on a stage with a drum kit before. I'm quite excited about that. It's going to be big sound. We'll be splitting it between some stuff that I've done before with people I'm used to working with, and then introducing the new lineup and the new material as well. So that is really exciting. It's going to be lovely. I've not done any gigs since the Full English finished, so I'm really excited actually to get back in front of audiences.